Hello, my name is Jennifer Ferreira and welcome to another Gran Entrevista. My guest today is a Luso-Canadian lawyer specializing in construction law. He received the designation earlier this year and is one of just 37 lawyers in Ontario to have it. Joining me now is lawyer William Ribeiro of Azevedo and Nelson Law Firm. Thank you so much for joining us today, William.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
If we could start by looking at you, tell us a bit about yourself.
Toronto native, born and raised in the east end of Toronto. Parents, Luso Canadian, like you said. Parents from the Azores. Mother from Fayal, and father who's passed on now was from Peak.
Okay.
Yeah.
In February, you became a certified specialist in construction law as designated by the Law Society of Ontario. What made you want to get the certification?
So I was called to the bar, which for your audience means becoming a lawyer. So called to the bar of the Law Society of Upper Canada, which is now the Law Society of Ontario, in 2002. So I've been practicing law for a good 15, 16 years now.
Right.
And I guess more of a fluke, really. In the beginning, I started practicing law with a firm that specialized or did a lot of construction law work.
Okay.
And went on from there to another firm that did a lot of construction law work. It ended up being many years of doing that kind of litigation, construction law litigation, and together with other commercial litigation, company litigation, contract disputes, that sort of thing. But I think after so I was certified earlier this year. So after a good 15, 16 years of practicing this type of law and dealing with very many different disputes, from the beginning of a lawsuit all the way concluding to trial and even appeals, really. I just felt that with the urging of some good friends,
that it was time to get certified.
Time, and that perhaps that if I applied, because it's an application process, if I applied with to the Law Society for that certification, that maybe I stood a good chance of getting it.
Right.
So I just thought it was the next thing to do, really, because I had that breadth of experience that I thought maybe if I did apply, I would be granted the honor of the designation, and things went well. And that's kind of what led to it. Of course,
you're here now with the certificate.
Yeah, I have that now.
And as you know, many members of the Portuguese community tend to be involved in the construction industry. And so what do you think is the importance in having access to a Luso-Canadian lawyer such as yourself?
You're right. And I can tell you when I first started practicing law, with the first firm that did a lot of construction work, a lot of Italian American companies or companies, construction contractor companies that were owned by Italian Americans. But as the years passed by, I started seeing more and more Portuguese Canadian owners of construction companies, and here in the Greater Toronto area in Southern Ontario, and it seemed like a natural fit. I can tell you that the construction bar, when I say the construction bar, it means the lawyers that practice construction law here in Ontario. It's not a big group. There's a lot of litigation lawyers, but the lawyers that tend to have their practices focusing on construction law, when you look at the number of lawyers that we have in Ontario, the number of litigation lawyers, the construction bar was smaller, and what was even smaller was lawyers with a Portuguese background that actually practiced in construction law litigation.
Right. And so why do you think that's so important for us to have more of these Portuguese lawyers? Do you think that there's value in it?
No, absolutely. I mean, value from my perspective, it's a market that naturally I saw I could have it in with if I went further with that specialty. But aside from my own personal benefit, when you talk about a benefit to the community at large, I think it's only natural that given the the presence of the Portuguese community now in the contractor world in Southern Ontario and in Greater Toronto, that extend to all facets of the construction world. And when I say that, like, yeah, I'm a lawyer, but really I help my clients collect their construction accounts, or perhaps defend them from people that are after them for their construction accounts, right? So really, what I'm helping to do in a greater perspective is bring that construction service to the population of the city and of the province. So given that the high amount of Portuguese community involvement in that, I think it would only be natural from top to bottom, meaning the people that swing the hammers all the way from the accountants to the owners of the business and then into the lawyers, that you have that representation of the community as well.
Of course. Now, I did mention earlier, you are one of 37 specialists in this area in the province. Now,
that was actually a surprise to me when I found that out. I did not realize. Because I just...
Did you expect there to be more specialists or less?
Much more. I know in other disciplines, I believe if you, and I don't know this 100%, so I won't say it with certainty, but I believe that there's around 12 or 15 designations that you can apply to from the Law Society to receive specialty designations. But I was very much surprised. We have 50,000 lawyers approximately in the province of Ontario right now. I didn't expect that they would only be around that number, 35 to 40. And you're saying it's 37?
It is 37.
Yeah,
why? But why did you not expect it to be so low?
Really, just because of the vast amount of lawyers. I thought that the number would be higher. I was surprised to learn that it was actually that low. Right?
Okay. Can you tell us a bit about your background when it comes to construction law in terms of studies and perhaps programs that you would have been involved in or have completed?
Hometown boy as far as university goes. University of Toronto is where I did my undergraduate. I went to Queen's in Kingston, Queen's University, to do law school, for law school. And I can tell you that 3 years of law school, didn't even know what construction law was. There was no course. I don't know if that's changed now in the law schools across Ontario, but at the time, there was no construction law or construction lien law course.
Okay.
It was a subset of another course. At that time, it was personal property securities law. In a very small subset. It might have had a footnote of one class, basically. So my introduction to it was really practicing law, and that just came about as a pure necessity. You can't turn your head in Toronto without getting almost hit in the head with a crane these days.
Fair enough.
There's construction everywhere. And that's been the case for quite some time. You just have to look at the city skyline down by the lake around the CN Tower to see how much that's changed in the last 25 years. And that's happening because a lot of construction is occurring around the city.
Yeah.
So it's, after this many years of practicing it, I can almost guarantee you that on every single construction site you find, there is someone or some company that feels that they're getting the short end of the stick, right? So, disputes happen, right? People will charge for services that they think they are entitled to, and usually the person that gets charged does not feel that they are entitled to it. And
right.
You need a dispute mechanism to resolve that dispute, and so even though in law school itself there was not a course for it, and in that way there was nobody actually opening you up to the idea of practicing construction law
specifically.
But when you got out there, you realized the actual demand for lawyers that could advocate for parties that were involved in those types of disputes. And so really it was a practical matter as of just practicing law. And then as I started practicing more and more, there was a designation from Osgoode Hall Law School that they actually had a construction law course that they offered. And after quite a few years of practicing it, I just thought it might be a good idea to further my background in it from an academic point of view and obtain that construction law certificate. So I did that from Osgoode Hall Law School along the way, right?
Okay.
That might have been like a good 5 years back now, once I did that. Yeah.
Okay. What advice would you give to those looking to get this construction law specialist certification?
It's a process, and you have to be able to show a certain amount of background standards and knowledge, and get references from people that I think you would more from people that would probably have a construction law specialist background themselves. And I was fortunate enough to have the references from those type of individuals. And
so that would be your biggest piece of advice then, is to look for people who have already established themselves in the field?
My biggest piece of advice is don't baby steps, like everything in life. Don't run up to the altar too quickly. You'd have to, if that was really what you wanted to if that designation was what you were looking for, I would suggest get into a firm that has an established construction law practice. In the beginning, to young lawyers that are coming out of law school, get yourself a good mentor that perhaps has that type of designation already to show you the ropes, and then but don't hide behind that robe of that lawyer for too long. Get out there and do your own motions, trials, and appeals, so that because I think it would be harder to achieve that type of designation without that kind of experience on your resume.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so get out there. First, start with a firm that has a lot of that work. Hopefully, get yourself a good mentor to direct you along the way, and then but soon after you get a little bit of that mentorship, get out there and start really practicing law yourself.
Tell us about some of the cases that you encounter on a daily basis.
My clientele is really anything from contractors, subcontractors, material suppliers, and even some owners and developers. Owners and developers, obviously people that own and want to develop their
Land.
Properties, develop land, be it into subdivision in homes or townhomes or condominiums, a lot of those across the city now. So more and more I've seen that kind of stuff come across my desk in the last 10 years or so. Contractors and subcontractors, all kinds really, from roofing contractors to steel reinforcing contractors, rough carpentry contractors, foundation concrete formwork contractors.
Really any kind of construction
really
industry.
any kind of construction.
Okay.
And when I say material suppliers, so material suppliers are usually people that actually do not go to site to do any construction. What they're doing is they're delivering materials for the construction.
So simply supplying them. Right.
Exactly, right? So that's really...
and you're based in Toronto. That's primarily the sort of clientele that you tend to is based in Toronto.
Yeah. I mean, my office is near the west side of downtown Toronto.
Right.
My clientele, by and large, majority are from the Toronto region, Greater Toronto region. I do have clientele in other parts of the province, in Southern Ontario, Cambridge, Kitchener, and even out of province. I've had some Quebec companies that have used my services in the past. And,
okay. What would you say are some of the biggest issues facing those in the construction industry from a legal standpoint?
Payment. The Construction Lien Act, which is the mechanism by which contractors, subcontractors, material suppliers, anybody who's owed money for services that they supply to the construction of a project, they have rights that are afforded to them by statute, by legislation of the province. What it does is it gives them the right to register a lien against title to a property. That lien follows the property. If it was not for the Lien Act, the Construction Lien Act, giving persons or companies that offer construction services the right to do that. By and large, they would only be left with a lawsuit against the person or the company that owes them the money. And really, what is a lawsuit? A lawsuit's a piece of paper that you file in a court and say, well, this person or this company owes me X amount of dollars for this service that I provided. And it's just a piece of paper in a court file. And until a judge at some point in the future, and here in Ontario, to get a trial date, you can be waiting for 3 to 4 years. It takes a while. But until a judge makes a determination on the actual amount that's owed for that dispute, it's still just a piece of paper in a court file somewhere in some court file room. And even when you get a judgment, it's still just a piece of paper in a court file. There's ways you can enforce a judgment, but when you have security against the property, I mean, the end, remedy that hopefully you never have to actually get to is like, okay, well, you won't pay me the amount that I'm owed after a trial, and after I get a lien judgment against you, I can now force the sale of this property to get the money that I'm owed. So it is a very powerful remedy that's granted to construction service providers here in the province of Ontario.
So you spoke about the number of days changing this year. Now, I believe I read differently. I read in 2017 that the Ontario Liberal government at the time had made amendments to the Construction Lien Act. And if I'm correct, it should be in October of 2019 that I believe that period might be extended?
No, so the actual period was extended as of July this year. My understanding is that there's 3 basic changes, and the 3 basic changes that are being introduced in the province's Construction Lien Act is number 1, the timeframes to lien will change, and those have actually that's happened already. I believe it was July, and I'm not. And I say believe because I want to qualify. As lawyers, we have to speak with certainty.
Of course.
So the actual time to lien changed this year. However, and I said this from before, there's procedural rules as to when your contract was actually, when you entered into your contract, because, if you've come to a point now where you've come to me and you want a lien, it's probably based on something of a contract that happened perhaps a year ago, maybe 5 years ago. And depending on when your contract was entered into, you will still be registering under the old time frame, under the old act.
Got it.
Okay, so it's very important that and I've talked to this to my my most important clients that I do work with on a regular basis, that just because they think or they read in the news that the lien period have changed from 45 days to 60 days, that they not have in their head that, oh, I'm okay now at 60 days. In fact, no, there's some complicated
intricacies
and procedural rules about how this new act is coming into being that I always tell my client, for you should always think it's still the 45 days. The other big change is something in the construction law world, is that it's known as the prompt payment. The idea of it was to try to alleviate litigation in the province of Ontario, to get construction funds flowing quicker and easier through the construction industry, and to get contractors paid and to get projects moving. That's the idea, but like with a lot of good ideas, when they come to pass, they don't seem to work out so well. It remains to be seen. But this prompt payment idea is that as long as you send out an invoice with certain in a form that this new Construction Lien Act tells you what it's going to look like. You send that out. You send it out to the person that owes you the money. They're supposed to pay you within a certain amount of time. If they do not, they have to put what's called a notice of objection. I mean, there's a lot of procedural rules, but the idea behind it is to get funds flowing quicker to the service providers and to get ultimately projects constructed faster. And the third is what's called adjudication. Again, I speak. This is all brand new stuff. The adjudication, and you talked about 2019. I believe it's the adjudication portion of this that won't actually come into effect until that time.
Next year.
So this is there's changes and there's a process over a certain amount of time. Adjudication, the idea of that will be that there will be, political appointees from whoever the powers that be at the time, and they'll appoint these adjudicators. And when disputes arise, because disputes always arise even as construction is going along, these adjudicators, where the idea is that you can apply and get an adjudication date with an adjudicator in very quick turnaround time. And when I say quick turnaround time, within a couple of months you can be in front of one, and that adjudicator will make a determination on that dispute and to keep the project going.
In order to keep, okay.
Right. Like I said, it remains to be seen. That might or it might not. At the end of the project, when a client or whoever feels that they're owed a certain amount of money, that adjudicator's decision might or might not stand up later in an actual court of law if you at the end of the actual project said, okay, I continue to work on that thing. I didn't agree with that adjudicator there, so I will reserve my right to fight about that issue later. But the project keeps going.
Right. I want to go back to prompt payment. Why is that so important?
It's so important because, like I had said, and I've seen it so many times, disputes, and especially larger projects, right? And I have I'm fortunate to have clients that are involved in such projects, and in such projects have a more complicated structure on how a party gets paid. So you'll finish a certain phase or stage of your construction contract, and then at that point you will apply for a draw on the amount that you're owed on the contract.
Okay.
Typically, that you submit that draw. An architect or a consultant will look at the draw, go out there, take a look at the actual construction, and then tell the person or the company that owes you the money, yes, it's good, pay them that amount. But these consultants, they worked for the developer or perhaps the contractor that you contracted with. They didn't work for you, the person that was providing the services.
Right.
So a lot of times you would have situations where the person that provided the services was not happy with what the consultant recommended as far as payment goes, and said, well, wait a minute, I was asked to do this extra, maybe they didn't sign a specific change order, but I did the work, and I laid out a lot of my own money and forces to be able to complete that work, and I have to be paid that work before I can continue to afford to go on with the next stage of construction. And in situations like that, you could have projects breaking down in the middle and then actually not going forward. And that's
because of those disputes, as you had mentioned
and that's
before.
a greater industry problem. Contracts, construction projects being mired in disputes and in litigation and coming to a halt because so the whole idea of prompt payment, because prompt payment comes together with the adjudicators. So you apply for prompt payment. I mean, the person that owes you the money has the right to object, and then you ask for an adjudicator to resolve that dispute. That adjudicator's decision carries now the force of law. So, I mean, it's not just a consultant that works for one of the parties. Now it's, an adjudicator that's being empowered by the new Construction Lien Act to actually render a decision and to keep the project going.
In your opinion, do you think that the values of these adjudicators will outweigh perhaps some of the consequences? Do you think it's a good aspect of this new legislation? Do you think it'll help?
Well, that's great. When I say that's a great question, it really is, because I think that's the question on most construction lawyers' minds, especially the ones that have been doing it for quite a while. Because I think the question really it's a more fundamental question of whether you believe that more rules and regulations help an economy, or whether a more freedom approach to letting people do what they do without people telling them what to do is a better way
to go.
The way to go to handle an economy. And I mean, that's an issue, and that reverberates all over society on so many levels. And that's really a question of, it remains to be seen how, because rules and regulations and laws, they're passed with great intentions, and in this case, these are great intentions to have construction projects completed more efficiently, effectively, and not waste a lot of money on litigation and timely and costly litigation. That is a great intention. Whether by actually, but you know, to get to that point, they're actually giving you more regulations and more rules in
an attempt to do that.
In an attempt to do that,
right?
And so you know, it's a project that's ongoing, and it remains to be seen how effective, in fact, it'll be. And I would imagine that you would need a window of time. And I say a window of time not from now, but when the actual prompt payment and adjudication process is, you know, fully up and running. And I would think a 5 to 10 year window would give a good sense to really evaluate whether this was a wise move or, in fact, a lot of people with good intentions that maybe complicated the industry more than adhered to been the case. So.
Is there a final message that you'd like to give to our Portuguese viewers?
Final message to the Portuguese viewers, to the young gentlemen and women that are looking to get into law from the Luso-Canadian community. I think it's like I said, you can't look around Toronto without seeing the amount of construction going on. And I know when I went to law school, I had no clue what area of law I wanted to get into. So the message to the younger generation that are looking at law as a career, look at this industry and that area of law, because I think there's a lot of work out there. And for capable and good litigators, I think it will offer a rewarding and satisfying career path. That's to them. To the larger community, or really, I guess, the Portuguese construction community, feel free, please, to get a hold of me with whatever questions and issues or disputes that you may have, and I'll see if I can help you out.
Okay. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, William. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
William is a lawyer with Azevedo and Nelson Law Firm located on 892 College Street in Toronto. My name is Jennifer Ferreira. This has been yet another Grande Entrevista. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.